I was born in a musical family. My grandfather, Upendra Kishore, was a composer, violinist. He played the flute, he played the bhagawaj. And on my mother's side, my mother's grandfather, Kalinaran Gupta, was a wonderful composer. And it so happens that on my mother's side, practically everyone is a natural singer. My grandmother could sing, and all her sisters could sing. My mother could sing. And my mother's sisters, brothers, and cousins were all natural singers. So I grew up in an atmosphere of music and singing, Rabindra Sangeet and Brahmo Sangeet, right from my birth. I have been exposed to Western classical music from a very early age. There were some records of classical music in my house. I don't know where they came from, but I had heard Beethoven's works and some other Western music from when I was a small boy. I had a gramophone, a toy gramophone, and some small records given to me as a birthday present, which consisted of all of it was Western music, waltzes, marches, and all that. So Western music has never been unfamiliar to me. I was exposed to it, and I had heard it. Along with Bengali songs and Bengali music, I was listening to Western music of some kind or other. And it developed into a very serious interest when I was at school, towards the end, when I was 13, 14. I had a friend at school who came from a fairly well-to-do family, and he also got interested in Western music, and he started buying records, and it was in his house that I was able to listen to music of Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, and others. So I got initiated very, very early when I was at school. When other boys were writing poetry or reading poetry, I was listening to music, reading about it, going to the libraries because I couldn't afford to buy books, and reading about composers and compositions and musical forms. So it was a very early initiation.
In Pother Panchali, Song of the Little Road, Ray made a major breakthrough in Indian film music, not only by using the gifts of a classical composer like Ravi Shankar, but also by exploiting them from an essentially cinematic point of view. His collaboration with several classical composers in the next few films created a new idiom of film music in India.
On Jalsa Ghar, I had worked with Vilayat Khan. And on Baby, I had worked with Ali Akbar. But they had become very busy international composers. They were not always available when I needed them. And I didn't want to dictate other composer. So at the time of Teen Kanna, in 1960, I think, I decided to try my own hand at composition. It was very difficult to start with, but eventually, in course of time, I managed to acquire some proficiency.
It was in Teen Kunna that Ray proved that as film music is one of the components of a film, a director of musical background is the fittest person to do the scoring for his film. From Teen Kunna onwards, Ray employed in each film a theme music to underline its central mood and to suggest a leitmotif in the multiplex structure of the film. an increasing stress on natural sounds, and particularly silence, and a sparing use of musical accompaniment are two important features of Ray's music.
বিরাট লোক, আমরা নতুন জেনারেশন তো, আমাদের সঙ্গে ঠিক ওনার।
আমি আসছি।
না শুনুন, মনে যেতে হবে।
Ideally, I think the director should be aware where music would be needed in his film. This is, I'm talking of the ideal situation where it is assumed that the director knows about music, is conscious of music, and also knows where his films would call for music. But of course, the ideal situation doesn't always exist, and you have directors who have very little conception of music, where, of course, he has to depend entirely on the professional composers. And there you have to assume that the professional composer is a competent composer. But in my case, of course, since I've been aware of music from a very early age, and music has been my first love, even before the cinema, and since I do my own composition, I have very set ideas about where music should be used in a film.
Charulata, the most satisfying experience to Ray as a music director. Even the structure of the film, with its subtle inner links, is musical.
After the introduction of sound, in the very early days, there was no music in films. As you can see, if you see the films of early 1930s, there is often no music at all. But gradually, the system of background music came into being, and the professional composers emerged, and big orchestras emerged. And there was a period then, in the 40s or late 30s, when music, a film would be drowned in music. But even later, after that, of course, a kind of balance was struck, and music was used very, very discreetly. But also at the same time, certain conventions developed, like using a certain kind of music for happy situations, a certain kind of music for sad situations, another kind of music for situations of suspense, and these became formulas, and sometimes lazy composers would use these formulas rather than think those situations afresh. We naturally try to avoid these hackneyed formulas as much as possible, and I think all directors should avoid hackneyed formulas and consider a situation afresh and try to be original and avoid convention, avoid the worn-out conventions. In my case, of course, I use now music less and less and less, and there are some directors in the West, as an example, Bergman, who hardly ever uses any music in his films. But we still do use music, partly because out of consideration for the audience, because sometimes the audience, we feel, the less intelligent audience would not be able to comprehend the moods, the changes in mood, And therefore, we underline those changes, those moods, by means of background music. But even so, I would say that I use music as discreetly as possible.
Ray's musical genius finds its brilliant expression in the lyrics and tunes he composed for his films.
My first original lyric was written for Devi, but the tune was not my own. It was based on the conventional Ram Prasadi tune. The words were my own. But my first original song, both lyric and tune and orchestration, was for Chiriyakhana. This was the song Bhalobasha Tumi Ki Jano, which is supposed to occur in an old Bengali film. Then I got interested in writing songs and found an opportunity to write several songs when I decided to make a film of my grandfather's short story, Gopi Gain. It became an elaborate musical film, and for it I wrote about 7 or 8 or 9 songs. I started by writing some of the songs. Even before I wrote the scenario, I imagined some of the situations that would occur in the film, and I wanted to find out whether I would be able to compose songs for the film. And I wrote 3 or 4 as a tryout, and when it turned out that they were quite satisfactory, I decided to make the film.
Maharaja Tumare selam 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 Mora Bangladesher theke elam Mora Bangladesher theke
His latest experiment in music in Ghore Baire, Home and the World. Like Tagore in his songs and Ravi Shankar in his instrumental music, Ray has blended Western and Indian elements to create his own distinctive musical form, and he has succeeded where others have failed in the Indian cinema. There is no getting away from the fact that no other film director in India has demonstrated the same command of film music as Ray. Ray's music is imaginative, not melodramatic, balanced, not exuberant, functional, not decorative. It is music that grows from the film itself. It seems that Indian cinema is not prepared yet to adopt the language of Ray's music.
It has been my intention right from the beginning to work as an independent composer not in opposition with other professional composers of music, but only for my own pleasure. I do it because I love doing it. I love composing songs. I love composing background music, and that is what I have been doing. There have been one or two exceptions. I worked for one or two other composers and other directors and other films, such as, well, for instance, Shakespeare Waller. But as a rule, and this is going to be a rule not only for now, but for future also, I shall work only for myself.